Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today, I have Chief Floyd from Enumclaw PD in Washington. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the show, Chief Floyd. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Paige.
Of course. So, you started this career when you were 23 years old. You were super young, and then you were a sergeant. So, you were in leadership by the age of 27. Give us a little bit of background. What got you started in law enforcement at such a young age, and what did your career look like that helped you to, advance so quickly, so early in your life?
Well, coming out of high school, I knew that law enforcement was going to be my path. And I went to college and got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and started testing for agencies right out of college. And it took me about a year and a half before I got hired. And I was hired in May of 1998 in a really small police department. I think we had 10 total employees.
Mhm.
And started working and learning the job. And um, there was some turnover above me in seniority. And so by the time I was in my fourth year, I would already was in the top half of the seniority of the department, and an opportunity to test for sergeant came up, and I took that opportunity and ended up getting promoted to sergeant at the age of 27, 4 years into my career. I had spent a little bit of time previous to that. I'd spent about a year working as the detective for that department, the only detective. So I had some investigations experience, and I had just recently um, become a member of the multi-agency SWAT team that we were a part of.
Mm.
So I had some variety in my skills, and I thought it'd be a good fit to make me a supervisor. So yeah, a sergeant at 27, so pretty
Wow.
early.
I'm always like really fascinated by people who knew what they wanted to do with their life so young. When I look back at my life when I was 23 years old, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. What was it about law enforcement that stuck out to you? Or, how did you start down that path where you said, like, I knew I wanted to do that, and so that's what I did?
It was my dad that kind of drove me that direction a little bit,
Mhm.
and he was not in law enforcement. He was in education, and I think he just kind of saw things in me that he thought might be a good fit for the law enforcement world. He had always looked at law enforcement as kind of like, if he hadn't been a teacher and then a school administrator and principal and all that, he thought that he would have enjoyed law enforcement. And I was pretty much a rule follower growing up and kind of took care of myself, but I also wouldn't back down if somebody got in my face. So he thought that law enforcement might be a good fit for me. And then we had a friend, family friend, who was in law enforcement, and I talked with him a lot, and just that's what kind of spurred my interest and spurred that direction for me. So
Yeah. So you inherently already had a lot of the qualities that are kind of a requirement of the position. You were a rule follower, you were courageous, you had those kind of qualities already set in yourself, and other people saw that in you.
yeah, I would say that's pretty
Yeah.
accurate. So
Yeah. How was it rising the ranks so quickly? Do you think that that gave added pressure to the career when we already know that there's already so much pressure and stress that comes along with this profession? Do you think that having those responsibilities so early added to that pressure?
um, a little bit, yeah. It in the agency that I was in at that time. Again, it's a small agency, and I was even at 4 years on, I was in the top half of the seniority,
Mm,
and um, even before I put stripes on my arm, I was kind of operating as a senior officer type supervisor some of the time anyways. So um but when you would put the stripes on your arm, things change. And that was my first experience with you know being uh people will challenge you to see which, if you're now going to be, if you're not going to act like a supervisor towards them as
mm,
opposed to just acting like a coworker towards them. And I got challenged a little bit the first couple months by some of the other officers. They wanted to see if I had the gumption to make a call that and tell them no when they asked for something or
Yeah.
whatnot. And so I did my job and I gained the respect and went from there. And it turned out fine. You know, you don't always it you, it's like I've been told in my career, when you get into leadership, you know, it's you have to be respected in your position. It's not necessary that you have to necessarily be liked by everybody.
Mm,
Being respected is important. Being liked by everybody isn't as quite as important. And
yeah.
if you do your job well and do your job right, people will respect you and respect the position that you hold within an agency. And if you're liked on top of that, well, that's good too.
Yeah,
So
it's a bonus.
yeah.
One of the conversations that I've been having recently with, other chiefs across the country is this interesting dynamic that I think everyone is kind of finding themselves in right now, where you have kind of a large portion of agencies who are kind of considered that like older generation that are preparing for retirement. And it's almost forcing the younger generation to rise the ranks quicker, right?
Mhm.
And this conversation is kind of come about of, how do you prepare the younger generation who maybe don't have a lot of years on the job to be able to step into these leadership roles as a large portion of the agency is now, preparing for retirement. Do you have any advice for maybe the younger generation for preparation for that or anything that you learned, kind of early to prepare yourself for a leadership position when you don't have a lot of years under your belt quite yet?
Well, you know, man, there's differences between management and leadership, as you
Mm,
know. You know, a lot of people can be managers, but not everybody can be. People can be taught to be managers. Not everybody can be taught to be a leader.
mm,
And a lot of leadership characteristics and traits are just inherently in your personality, or they aren't. Um, but early on in my career, I had, uh, I was fortunate to work for another supervisor who really ingrained in me the importance of training and education. And as I've moved through my career and have started moving up the ranks, I've really encouraged my officers to get as much training as they can, but to also continue their education outside of work. And education is never bad. Training, you know, there's restraints, you know, there's it's not restraints, but constraints in budget. You know, we can only pay for so much training, but it and look for things that are interesting to you, but also will contribute to the benefit of the department as well. And we try to, at least where I'm at now in the position that I'm at now, we try to and when I tell people when I'm hiring them and interviewing them, like we encourage leadership at every level.
mhm.
And you don't have to necessarily have a rank or a title to be able to step up and take a leadership role in certain situations if you see that there's a need to do it. So
Yeah.
we try to promote that in everybody that we hire, and regardless of what division they work in.
I really like that because it empowers everyone to continue to grow and to learn. And, one of the things that I'm really grateful for in my career and what I did with, early on was just that. I was really hungry to learn as much as I possibly could. And it wasn't necessarily, something that I spent a ton of money on, but it was something I spent a ton of time doing. And in my head, if I was willing to do the work that everyone else was not willing to do on my time off or on my days off, in between, the training that I was already doing, then that meant that I was going to be better prepared and I was going to be set up for more opportunity in the future. And I will admittedly say that I think sometimes it was a little unhealthy how like motivated and driven I was to do that because I think I let it consume everything. However, it did allow me to progress a lot quicker than other people who kind of came up at the same time that I did because I was willing to put in that effort and that work. And so I like that you said, hey, you don't have to be, uh, you know, have a leadership title in order to have leadership qualities. You don't have to rely necessarily on the agency for everything. There are things that you can do on your own time to better prepare yourself and to equip yourself
Absolutely.
with the knowledge and training and education. So,
You know, early on, about the time I was promoted to sergeant at 27, I had a bachelor's degree already. I wasn't planning on going back to school at that point, and I kind of looked at uh, me getting on our SWAT team, or we're part of a multi-agency SWAT team, had about 40 members and covered, I think, 9 or 10 different cities. I looked at that kind of as further education for me in my career at that point because it put me in a position to get a lot of advanced training and be involved in a lot of high risk situations that just honed my skills better that I could take back to patrol and teach to other officers. So I kind of looked at being on the SWAT team as kind of like a higher education, advanced training curriculum, for me at that point in my career too. So
yeah. No, I think that's an important message because sometimes I think you get so stuck in this idea that like you have to focus on your particular role. And I've actually found that by cross training and learning in other areas, it's actually helped me even more than just trying to figure out what I'm doing in this one particular role. And a lot of times it was stuff I didn't want to do, like personally, like it was, trying to learn different methodologies or understanding different thought processes with things or like deep diving anatomy training, like stuff that like maybe I didn't necessarily want to do, but I knew that
yeah,
it was going to help me in the long run. And so I think having that mindset too, that like maybe you can learn how to be a better leader. Maybe you don't have to learn it in law enforcement leadership. Maybe you can
right.
read a book that helps you to be a leader for a corporation or, whatever it is, and that's going to help you in your career path as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So
For sure.
you shared a story with me, and I really want you to be the one to kind of, use your words for this, but you shared a story with me about how you, were working for leadership and you had maybe some personal experiences with that. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. And I would love if you could tell us what happened.
Well, so, I'm going to be careful not to use names of agencies and people here, but so I started with the 10-man department, got promoted to sergeant in year 4, and I stayed with that department for about 7 years. And that city, at the 7 year mark, um, I at that point in my personal life, I was just about to become a father. Um, my wife at the time she was a teacher, and but the city I was working for, that 10-man department, was having serious financial problems. The city was considering filing for bankruptcy, like unincorporating, getting rid of all the city departments, including the police department, etc. So I needed a paycheck, so I lateraled to a nearby agency of about 70 officers, and went back to being a patrol officer rank. I didn't go across as a sergeant. I went back to being a patrol officer. Um, because that agency was part of the SWAT team that I had already been on, I was able to stay on the team just with a different patch now. And I worked for that agency for about 3 years. Loved it there. Great place to work. Still got a lot of friends that work there. I interact with that department on a fairly regular basis still. And so I spent about 3 years there. Well, when I was working for the 10-man department, right next to the 10-man department was about a 30-man department, which we dispatched through their department. We were on the same channel, so we backed them up. They backed us up. So we had a real close relationship with that department. And they had a new chief come into that 30-man department, and he brought in an assistant chief from another agency who I knew from being on the SWAT team with him. and they created a patrol commander position. So like the number three in charge position, which is a new position for this 30-man agency, 30 officer agency. And so I'm over in the 70 officer place, just working patrol. And I was reached out to kind of to apply for this commander's position. So I applied for it. I got the job. And I went from the 70 officer department over to the 30 officer department as the number three in charge, so operations commander. And I knew these two gentlemen. I'd worked with them, but never worked for them. They were both older than me, later in their careers than I was. And I kind of looked at it. So I left for a promotional opportunity and went from being a patrol officer to now being the number three in charge in a smaller department. And I thought these guys would be great mentors for me. And I'm 33 years old now at this point, roughly, and I'm number three in charge. And I'm looking at, a good roadmap to be a chief someday, pretty early in my career, which at that point was a goal for me, kind of. And so I got started working there and got to be exposed to a lot of different things that I hadn't been exposed to in my career yet. Like supervising a dispatch center, supervising a jail, supervising canine. I was no longer on the SWAT team at this point and got to be involved with emergency management operations at the county level and because of my position, I got to do a lot of really cool stuff and got to go to a lot of really great training. But about a year or two into that job, it became clear that these two guys I was working for, I thought would be great mentors for me, were not going to be great mentors for me. And, there's probably some cops that'll watch this podcast, and cops aren't stupid. There's two lines that people can read between them. So I'll just leave it at that. And after about 5 years there, I had a second child. And during that time, so I had two kids at that point. And I decided, because I wanted to be a chief, I needed to go back to school and get my master's degree. So I started my MBA program at the University of Washington. And I was really on the outs at this point with the chief and assistant chief. And they had been drug into an IA, and I had needed to testify basically against them. And that put me in a tough spot because I was not a union member, didn't really have any protection. And so it was just the environment was made so unbearable that I just basically had to leave. I had to drop out of my MBA program. I was having to work 70 to 80 hours a week to keep up with the workload that was being put on me. Fell into depression, anxiety, ended up having to be on some medication. I dropped 60 pounds during that time. I was working 6 to 7 days a week to try and keep up with the amount of work that was being put on my plate. So my wife at the time said, and it was really, not only is it taking its toll on me and my physical and mental health, but it's taking a toll on my marriage and kids. And my wife came to me and said, you gotta get out of there. She was a teacher. She was off for the summer. She said, start applying to other places, just go back to patrol somewhere. And if you don't have a job by the time, I go back to school in the fall, you're just going to quit. We're going to figure it out. So I applied at two smaller agencies just to go back to patrol. And one was these two agencies are right next door to each other in the far other side of the county that I was working in. One was in the current county I was in, and one was in a county just to the north, which is King County. I tested for both agencies. I came out number one on both tests. The small agency that was in the current county I was in, that chief passed me over right away, didn't even give me a phone call.
Mm.
because he was friends with these two chiefs that I was currently working for, and he knew that there was bad blood between me and them. The chief in the other county, but happened to be right next door, uh, he hired me for patrol. And so I got kind of a fresh start in a new county, went back to the road, um, took a $30,000 pay cut to go there, went back to working graveyard, shift work, weekends, nights, holidays. Um, Best move of my career. I
Mm.
would do it again in a heartbeat. And at that point in my career, I was about, I don't know, 39, 38, 39, somewhere in there. And kind of took the position of I did not enjoy being in administration because I kind of had a 5 year nightmare that I'd just come out of. And I kind of swore up and down to anybody who would listen that I will never promote above sergeant ever again, ever. So I was working the road in Enumclaw and um, went through a divorce during that first couple years. And, uh, divorces are never easy or fun, but a lot of they happen. So we went through that and spent a while single. Um, so I came to Enumclaw in 2013. In 2017, the opportunity to test for sergeant came up. So I tested for sergeant, came out number one, got stripes, and now I was a patrol sergeant again, and that was it. That was going to be it for me. And I was going to finish my job as patrol sergeant. Patrol sergeant's the best job in law enforcement. And shortly after I became a sergeant, we had a change in leadership in our department. The chief who had hired me there, he retired, and our captain moved up to chief, and he redid the org chart, the organization of our department. It used to be a chief and then a captain, and then all first level supervisors kind of fed into the captain. Well, because our agency also has a dispatch center and a jail, he split that captain's position into two commander positions. And he came to me and said, I really need you to test for commander. And I was like, there's no way that's going to happen. No, he said, I really need you to, because of your experience in that previous agency as a commander, having dispatch and jail supervision experience. Nobody else in this building has that except for him. I really need you to test, and you'll become the support services commander over jail and dispatch and records, and then we'll have another sergeant test, and he'll be the operations commander. So I had been a sergeant for 5 months. I wasn't even off probation yet. So here I am testing for commander, somewhat reluctantly. And so two commanders openings, me and another sergeant tested for the job, and I was the only one that passed the test. So the other sergeant didn't pass the assessment center. So I became the only commander over all divisions. So detectives, patrol, dispatch, jail. And I did that for about 6 months. And then another testing cycle came through and a different sergeant got promoted. So he became operations commander. I I was the support services commander, and that chief who would set that up came to us. And so we had a pretty new administration all within about 6 months, all three of us. And the chief said, well, here's the deal. I'm short timer. I've got 3 years and I'm going to retire. And who's it going to be? Which one of you is going to take over? And um, the other commander at the time didn't have aspirations of moving any higher. And so it kind of became the plan, a 3 year plan to put me in the chief spot. So we worked that 3 years. And when he retired, the city didn't even open up the job. They just promoted me straight into chief. And I had support within the agency and support within the council. And it was a pretty easy transition. Um, so that was in July of 21. So I'm in my 5th year as chief now. And I like it a lot more than I thought I would. So I actually really love my job. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you
That's the
for sharing.
that's the story, the very short version of the very long story. So in my 28 years, I've gone from officer to detective to officer to sergeant to officer to commander to officer to sergeant to commander to chief over four agencies.
Just a little zigzag.
Little zigzag. And I did finish my master's degree about 18 months ago and through the University of Virginia. Um, about 3 years ago, I attended the FBI National Academy, which was always a dream of mine. So I was session 284. And so it's been a good position for me. And I look back at my previous agency when where I was the commander and had the issues with the leadership there. I look back at that 5 years and realized that a lot of the stuff I learned during that turmoil, you learn things through adversity, right? You don't always just learn stuff through the good times. You learn things through adversity. You learn things about yourself and about how things really work in the real world. And I learned a lot. As hard as that experience was, I learned a lot that I have brought forward now to kind of shape the how I am as a chief in the role that I am.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I agree with you. I think adversity is one of our greatest teachers. I have learned more through the hard times in my life than when everything is going great. And I had this conversation recently of, when people tell you you're great all the time and when things are happy all the time, you don't have those moments, I don't think, of introspection in the same way that you do when things are really dark and hard,
mhm,
and you're faced with those crossroad moments of, okay, how am I going to move forward from this? Am I going to continue down this same path, or
yeah,
am I going to make a change in my life? And it's really interesting that, this topic has actually come up a few times recently. And I find that there's kind of these waves of topics that I have. And I was speaking with someone, and they were currently going through something similar. And kind of just expressing to me how hard it is to be in that position when you're under people who are, I'll use their words, not your words, because it's the conversation I had with them, but, under bad leadership or toxic leadership. And this individual looked at me and they were like, Paige, I have been on this job for a long time and I have seen the worst of the worst out on patrol. And they, gave me some graphic examples of some things that they have seen, throughout their career. And they said, this is the most stressed and the hardest my career has ever been because of leadership. And I
mhm,
think it's a testament to, like, the internal stressors can sometimes be far worse than the external stressors.
100%.
And you went over some of the things that happened to you physically and mentally, and, to the point where you were forced to make a decision of stepping down from a leadership position, taking a pay cut to say, I have to prioritize myself. I have to prioritize my physical and mental health right now. I have to prioritize my family. And you were
Mhm.
at that crossroads moment of, like, what am I going to do? Am I going to stay in this position, or am I going to make a different choice for myself that's maybe a healthier option? What do you think that whole experience taught you about the leader that you want to be? And I know you didn't want to be for a while, and, fast forward, now we're here and you're chief of police, but what did that teach you about resiliency, and what did that teach you about the kind of leader that you want to be today?
Well, I take the approach in my position that a couple different things. Some of the agencies that I worked for previously were some of the chiefs that I worked for previously are were very stat driven chiefs. You got to put up the stats. You got to write so many tickets. You got to make so many arrests, and If you don't, you're going to be called on the carpet or yelled at every month. How come you only wrote 40 tickets instead of 80 tickets and,
Mm.
and whatnot. And I hated that. And so I'm not a stat driven chief. I am a customer service driven chief. And I tell my staff, okay, here's the thing. In our community, our citizens might only ever interact with us one time, right? In their entire life that they live here. And I want that one time to be a superb experience.
Mhm.
So when you go handle a call, you take as much time as you need to make sure that that person feels like they got a good customer service experience,
Yeah.
and put in the extra time and visit with them and make sure that all their needs are taken care of. Customer service is number one. And in between your calls, go write some tickets every now and then. Okay. I don't, you do have to do some traffic enforcement and be proactive. You can't just not do that. But that's not really what I harp on. So that has I kind of take that stance because of my experiences as a younger officer, right?
Yeah.
And then I want the world of law enforcement is when you go outside the walls of the agency, it's tough, right? Because you're on high alert and you could get ambushed and killed or just assaulted, and people don't always like police officers, and when you go outside the walls, you got to be watching your back. You shouldn't have back inside the walls.
Mm.
And places, especially the place that I came from prior to being in Enumclaw, you had to watch your back more inside the walls than you did outside the walls. And you should be able to come into the station and take a breath and relax and not have to always watch out for who's after you inside the walls of the PD.
Yeah.
And so when I look at hiring people, and when I got to Enumclaw in 2013, I wouldn't say that it was a perfect environment because it certainly wasn't. I left a toxic agency and came to a toxic agency, but it was just a little bit. It was a different toxicity, different reasons, and as I moved up through leadership, me and one of my commanders who was kind of moved up with me at the same time, we kind of made a commitment to change the culture and make it a healthy environment inside of our walls.
Mhm.
Excuse me. So, and that took about 5 years, and it took an effort, just talking to the majority of the people and kind of say, listen, we need to change our environment here because it's not healthy. And some people left the agency, some people got fired, some people retired. And as we were able to kind of influence the agency more through our rank, we've turned it around, right? And I kind of preach that still. And it's not something that you go, okay, we've fixed it and now we're done.
Mhm.
It's a everyday thing. You have to to keep a healthy, positive environment inside your station, you have to work at that every day. And everyone has to be on board with that. And that's what I push and I preach in our station. And it has turned out to be so we did a 180, and it took about 5 years, but we went from being a very toxic place and nobody wanted to be in the station to where now I have trouble sometimes getting people out of the station. Like, oh, you guys got to go do some work, because everybody is friends and everybody enjoys each other's company and we laugh and joke. And around lunchtime, I go sit in our training room with officers and detectives, and we all sit and have lunch together and visit, and because we all genuinely enjoy each other's company, right? So when I hire people, I when I'm going through an interview process with somebody, and whether it's patrol, because we have patrol and we have dispatch and we have corrections, doesn't matter, whatever, it doesn't matter what agency or division you're in. I tell people, I kind of so here's my hiring mantra for my agency, and I kind of have two buckets that I look at here, right? And as I look at the person sitting in front of me, does this person have the job knowledge, skills, and abilities for the division that I'm hiring for? Or at least do I feel that they have the potential to learn the job knowledge, skills, and abilities if they're a entry level person? That's half of the equation. The other half is, does the person sitting in front of me, are they going to come into our agency and contribute to the positive, healthy environment that we've created?
Mhm.
Or are they going to detract from that? And I tell the person, if I don't care how good you are, you could be a rock star corrections officer, dispatcher, patrol officer, have all the certifications and do all, be the best cop in the world. If you're going to come into our agency and create turmoil, you are not going to work here. I don't care how good you are. You need to be a good person first, and then a good employee second. And I would rather take somebody, an officers who might take a little bit longer to develop and train. I would hire that person if they are truly a good person and are going to create a healthy environment. I would hire that person over a rock star officer who's a jerk, and 10
Yeah.
times out of 10. So, and I wanted to go back in a minute and talk about where the transition from coming to Enumclaw and stepping down from rank and then moving back up the ranks. And I have really learned, looking back on that experience, how it's kind of prepared me to put me here where I am now. I am a true believer in people end up where they're supposed to end up,
Mhm.
right? And for a long time, I used to say, well, had I had a crystal ball back in 2008, I would have never left that 70-man agency because I loved working there. But had I stayed there, I wouldn't be where I am now. And I wouldn't have gone through and learned all these things that I learned through the turmoil and the rebuilding and all that stuff, right? But I also believe that certain people come into your life at the opportune moments to to help you grow. And I got remarried in 2018. And um, my wife, if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't be where I am now, too. So,
Yeah.
a combination of the experience that I had and then her coming into my life and helping me grow as a person kind of has helped me get to where I am currently. So, yeah.
Thank you for saying that. When you were talking about it, I was kind of reflecting on my life, and I'm sure anyone who is listening to this is kind of having that same moment of, because I agree with you. I believe that you end up right where you're supposed to be. And I have a lot of people all the time ask me, they're like, how did you start working with law enforcement? And my background is so different. And even though my childhood was really hard, my background was really hard, I think that because I was able to go through that adversity in my life, it helped prepare me for the things that I'm doing now. And if I hadn't gone through those things, would I be here today? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because, we don't have that crystal ball. We can't like play out every scenario in our lives, but I really don't think that if I hadn't gone through those things that I would be able to relate to people in the way that I do now, or that I would be so passionate about wellness as I am now. I think that those things gave me that passion that I have now to have a career in this wellness space. And when you said people come into your life at the opportune times, like I had mentors that entered into my life at different times that helped me grow. I had people, that one sergeant at the police academy that was like, hey, like 8 years ago, that was way ahead of his time. It was like, hey, do you want to come help me? And I was like, sure, and like learning boots on the ground, like all those things. I think everyone can look back on their life and say, unfortunately, none of us get to the end of this life unscathed, and we all have our own trials and tribulations that we have to go through in our lives, and some are harder than others. But I almost have this mentality of gratitude now, even though like some of those things really sucked and were so hard.
Yeah.
It's almost this like perspective of, wow, like I'm so glad that that happened because I'm here today, and I do
Mhm.
feel better equipped to do the things that I'm doing today because of those things. You talked a lot about culture and changing culture. And, as you're talking and we're talking kind of about this, like, do you think that you would have that same passion for changing culture if you didn't have the experience of being in a really toxic, bad one, And I see you shaking your head of like, no, so.
No, it definitely not. When I was the commander in my previous agency and things were really bad there. Um, there was a period of time where be driving into work in the morning and I'd have to stop and throw up on the side of the road because
Wow.
I did not want to go there, and I just did not want to be there. And I don't. So I look back at what I went through, and I don't ever want any of my staff where I'm at now. I don't ever want anybody to feel like that.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think that had I not gone through that, I don't think that I would be as sensitive to that, I guess,
Right.
as I am. I always want my staff to want to come to work. Now which is unrealistic, right? There's days where there's days I don't want to go to work. That just happens with everybody. But I want them to look at our their agency as a whole and go, I really enjoy working there
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things. And it has somewhat helped with our recruiting efforts. Um, it has gotten out, I guess you could say. We're a small agency in a rural part of the county. We are not wealthy. We don't have the nicest station or the best equipment. We're not the highest paid, and we're never going to be. But it is kind of proliferated around the area into other agencies that people who work in Enumclaw really like working there. People there are happy.
Yeah.
And it has even gotten back to the police academy. There is a class that's taught up at our academy, which is about an hour away. And the instructor at the beginning of every class asks the class for, by a show of hands, who here feels totally happy and supported at the agency that they work at? Now, that's a loaded question, right?
Yeah.
Because nobody raises their hands except for the people from Enumclaw. And then about the seventh time had taught a class and somebody from Enumclaw was in the class, he stopped and said, I ask this question every class that I teach, and he teaches this class every week or every month. He said, nobody has ever raised their hand except for the people from Enumclaw. What is going on out there?
What
So, that got back to me. So that's good to hear. Right.
a huge compliment.
Yeah. So
Do you think, I know you talked a little bit about like recruitment efforts, and do you think that organizational wellness and having a good culture impacts not only recruitment but also retention? Like, do you feel that by having that foundation that you are setting up your organization for success long term?
I think so. And, we have lost some officers to other agencies, and, but none of them have left. I didn't get the feeling that any of them have left because they were unhappy with working in our agency.
Mm.
They weren't like, oh, this place is horrible, or you're a horrible chief, or you're a horrible boss. They left for other opportunities that we just don't have.
Sure.
Okay. So we don't have canine, we don't have motorcycles, we don't have dive team or SWAT or any of that stuff. And we had a younger officer who was young in his career. He wanted to do all the stuff, right? SWAT and canine and all the stuff. And we just don't have that. We're never going to. So he went to a bigger agency where he could do that totally fine. I did everything I could to help him, right?
Mm.
Another officer last year, a couple years ago, said, "Hey, I'm getting married and we're moving to San Antonio."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, that's a good reason to go to San Antonio."
Yeah.
And so I called a classmate of mine from the National Academy who worked in San Antonio, and now he works in San Antonio. So, and then another seasoned officer that was with us, she left to a neighboring agency because they were actually hiring lateral detectives,
Mm-hmm.
which is almost unheard of. But this agency was opened up for lateral detectives. You can go straight into their agency as a detective, and it wasn't a rotation. Like she would go in there and stay a detective for the rest of her career. So she took that opportunity, and I don't blame her.
Mm-hmm.
Good for her. So,
Yeah.
but you know how the saying goes, like people don't leave. Most of the time, people don't leave bad jobs; they leave bad bosses.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's typically why people leave jobs is because they have a horrible boss.
Yeah.
That's why I left. That's how I ended up in Unicor. Um, but the people that have left, I don't feel like they have left because of the administration or that it's a poor environment. They left for opportunity that we just don't have, which is totally understandable. Not sure I answered your question. I
You
think I may have
did.
got off topic there.
No, you did. But I think my question is because the conversation of culture as a foundation for wellness has come up a lot, and
Mhm.
the importance of having a healthy culture and a strong foundation within the organization. And we also have a lot of conversation about your people being your most valuable asset, and how do you support them, like you said, within the walls of your organization? How do you make sure that you're not adding more stress and strain to an already incredibly stressful and hard career? My question is, if we know that, if we know that a positive culture is important and that should be the foundation, and we know now that that helps with recruitment and retention efforts, why is why isn't every organization across the country prioritizing culture? Why is that not like step number one?
That's a tough that's a tough question. I think there's probably a multi-layer answer there,
Sure.
which I'm probably not smart enough to give.
It's okay. You
But
could leave it
it
at that question mark. Maybe just
yeah,
leave it at a
yeah,
question. Like, why is this not the
yeah.
number one thing? And, because you have experience too, like, and this could be a second part to the question, but, anyone who's listening who maybe is in an organization that is toxic, or a chief who is trying to turn things around, entered into an environment where they're like, oh my gosh, I have to make a change. I want to do a 180 here. Maybe what are some like actionable steps? Like maybe like top three things that worked for you that you've been able to maintain over a consistent, period of time to be able to create a more positive culture.
Number one, don't change. Don't change who you are when you put stars on.
Mm,
Okay. Um, yeah, I've seen chiefs that in the throughout my career, four different agencies, two different counties, and um, I've seen people that move up through the ranks, and pretty soon you don't recognize who they are because their personality changes.
mhm.
And um, but I don't want to toot my own horn or sound, braggy, but I don't. I was paid a pretty good compliment about 6 months ago by um, a law enforcement sales rep who I've known for a long time, he knew me as a patrol officer. He's known me over several different agencies and several different rank changes and whatnot. He said, I've seen a lot of people move up through the ranks and become chiefs, and he said, you're like one of the only ones that you're the same guy as you were when you were working graveyard patrol.
Yeah.
And so I think, which to me was a huge compliment. He said, you haven't let your ego take over because of your rank. So, and I'm not saying that I'm any better than anybody else because I'm not special by any means, but that meant a lot to me that he said that. But I also look back and go, I think that has helped me, especially in the size agency that I'm in because we're not big. And there's, I still from time to time go out and help with calls and make traffic stops and do road level type work. And I'll go down in the jail on occasion when there's a fight that breaks out, and I'll go down there and help and do what I can. And I'll cover dispatchers for, short breaks or whatever. And so I'm not, I'm still in there doing the work with my folks, right? Um, as as my other duties allow, but um, just it is so easy to become detached from your agency. And I've seen from afar other chiefs that that's happened to, where once you become a chief, there are so many things that you can get involved with that take you away from why you're even chief in the first place.
Mm,
And I could be involved in different groups and organizations and state level committees and this and that, and where I would never be at my office. Those other commitments that I could be involved with would take me out of the city 70% of the time.
right,
Well, it's hard to have FaceTime with your people and get to know the people who work with you if you're never there.
right.
And I've seen that, bite some people in the butt because they get into a chief's role and they want to do all this stuff. And it's very uh, enticing to get involved in all these other committees and all these other things. But I've also seen it doesn't, in the long run, doesn't help them within the walls of their agency that they wear the patches for, right? So
Yeah.
I've really, when I became a chief and I started to get some invites to, hey, come sit on this committee and some come do that, and I I I do very little of that because my priority is the people inside my walls. So, and I think that's helped because uh, I'm there. They see me. I go have lunch with them. I go have coffee with them. I go pack them on traffic stops. Um, and, you know, I talk to them on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
I'm present, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I wrote down. And so I was kind of writing down like the bullet points of like one, like don't change who you are, be authentically you, be available, be present within the organization. And the one thing that I heard from you is showing people that you care. It's not just saying it once and then walking out the door. Like you are actually showing up in people's lives. Like you are
Yeah.
actually showing them that they're valuable and that you care about them.
Yeah,
And that
for
helps
sure.
to
And I
create
do.
your
And
culture.
it's, and it's not just because it makes things better. I actually, I show them that I care about them because I do,
Hmm.
right? It's not a show. It's reality.
Yeah.
So
And it goes back to that authenticity. I think at the end of the day, no matter what career you're in, no matter like what title you have, we're all humans. And I think everyone wants to feel valued. At the end of the day, like we all want to feel like the contributions that we're making, in our families, in our careers, that those things are valued and recognized and that we have purpose, and that we're respected for the things that we do. And all of those things don't cost money, they
no,
take effort. I
right.
think sometimes we forget about that. And of course, like I'm in this wellness space, like I understand that like things do cost money and there's lots of different like programming and there's equipment and there's all the things that you can add. But I think at a foundation, it's important to remember that like we're all human and effort goes a long way to show people that they matter because they do, like you said. I think that you know people are the most valuable asset, and I think the more that we can remember that, of smiling, saying hello, asking how people are doing, like taking that extra time to go have a coffee or lunch, like those things take effort, not money, and they go a long way.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
It 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 is it just makes things flow smoother, right?
Mm.
And when I hire people, I tell them, I give them the two buckets, spiel. And I tell them, I said, when I bring somebody in the walls of this agency, I said, we're kind of like a family, right? So we're hiring is the most important thing I do. And I said, not everybody's going to get along all the time. Families don't even get along all the time.
Mhm.
So, but I said, you don't have to be best friends with everybody that works here, but you have to be friendly. So, everybody, and then I also tell them, I said, and it doesn't really matter, with our different divisions, it doesn't matter if you're a patrol officer or a corrections officer or a dispatcher. Nobody's better than anybody else. We're all on the same team here. Nobody can do their job without the other divisions doing their job. A patrol officer is not a better person or a more prestigious person than a corrections officer or a dispatcher or whatever. So everybody's on equal playing ground.
Yeah.
And I expect everybody to treat each other as such.
Yeah.
And they do.
And I like that you say that because it does create more of a team mentality. And what you said earlier, it's like there's less friction. There's less judgment, there's less friction within the organization, and that you said smooth, like it makes things go smoother in that way. I have one final question for you, and then I'll kind of let you take the floor if I missed anything at all. But
Sure.
this is for the younger generation in the context of wellness. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Um, I was told this probably 10 years into my career, and it's always stuck with me. And I've told other people this, other younger officers, that although this is there's a difference between a job and a career, right? And that's a whole other thing. But this is not just a job; it's a career. It's kind of a lifestyle, and it's important to treat it that way, right? It's a profession. We're not just showing up to punch a clock and make widgets and go home, right? It's a profession. It's a highly skilled profession. You need to continue training and education to be successful at this profession, but never, start your profession with the end in mind, right? Because someday this profession is going to end and it's going to move past you really quickly, like the next day. And so start with the end in mind and that encompasses several different aspects, right? Financially, start with the end in mind. Start your deferred compensation early. So when you get to the end, you have a lot of money,
Mhm.
right? Start with the end in mind that you're going to maintain your health, both physically and mentally, for this marathon of a career, because it's not a sprint. A lot of new officers get into this career and it's like a sprint
Mhm.
every day, and it's not. This is a marathon, and you know you got to treat it as such. So take care of yourself physically and mentally for this marathon. And then take care of your relationships, right? With your girlfriend or wife or whatever, or husband. Because at the end of the day, when you get done with the marathon and the game's over, like nobody's going to care how many tickets you wrote. Nobody's going to talk about how many arrests you made at your retirement party. Okay. At the end of the day, when the game's over, all that really matters is like, do you have enough money to live off of in retirement? Did you make good choices financially throughout your career? Um, is your body still healthy enough and your mind still healthy enough to go enjoy retirement, right?
Mhm.
And is your marriage healthy enough to and still intact to get into retirement and enjoy retirement with your spouse? And did you raise kids that still want to be around you, right? Do you have good relationships with the kids that you raise, which is tough when you work shift work, right? To have a family and be the whole family man thing. That's hard to do. So, at the end of the day, start your career with the end in mind in those things with those aspects, because you're going to retire and you're going to call out of service, and the next day this career keeps going, and
Yeah.
you're out. So you got to make sure that you cultivate the things that are really going to be important when you get to that point.
Yeah.
So,
No, I like that a lot. And, one thing that really stuck with me, that someone said was it's not the length of your life, it's the quality of your life.
mhm.
And, how can you set yourself up for that proactively? How
Yeah,
can you prepare yourself so that you have quality of life? And I do have one more question for you. And I know that I said
sure.
that was the last one, but you talked about retirement, preparing yourself for this. After everything that you've gone through in your life and in your career, all of the adversity, all of the achievements, what do you want to be remembered as when you retire?
um, ooh, let's see. I want to be remembered as somebody who cared about the people that he worked with. I want to be remembered as somebody who was dependable and worked hard. Um, but I want to be remembered as, being a good father and a good husband, as well as, being a good police officer. So, um, I guess my coworkers that will maintain past when I retire, I hope that they remember me as, having been a good chief and change agent for our agency, um, and that I left it, better than how I found it. So that's about it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate your time so much. And
I
if there's,
appreciate you,
if
Paige.
there's anything I missed at all, let me know. I'll let you take the floor, but I've really enjoyed today's conversation, so thank you.
No, I enjoyed it as well, and yeah, I appreciate you reaching out to me, and I enjoyed this conversation. So thank you.
Of course. Of course.